But if they're anarchists, it means that they're accepting the liberal subject, not the embedded social subject. You guys can see this, all right? So here's the world as it is. This is the world we live in. It sucks. We hate it. We recognize that it's bad because we're alienated from our time and our labor. That makes things shitty. That makes us want to die, but also afraid of dying. You got up here, socialism, let's say, broadly construed because we're trying to do big tent. We're going to take on good faith everybody's claim that they are a socialist when they say it. We all live down here, and we all have to build a bridge. First through thought, then through action, praxis, that is then collectively endeavored towards the goal. If you get enough people pushing in the same direction, you can get here. But they all have to be doing it together. That's cooperation, that's socialism, that's communism, that's everything. Okay? So the thing is, how do you get it? What's the engine? What's the thought engine that drives this from is to should be? Okay? I would say that Marx, because he emerged at the moment that capitalism emerged. That's not a coincidence. He was historically contingent. Marx emerged when he did because he was seeing the beginning of capitalism. He grasped all of its contours. And so that is why his analysis of capitalism is the single most important one. It doesn't mean he was right about everything. It doesn't even mean he was right on balance in some way, most things. It means he was right on the most basic things that you build from. Because you can say, well, Marx didn't anticipate ecology, and Marx didn't anticipate feminism, or Marx didn't anticipate racism. Marx didn't anticipate technological advancement. Marx didn't anticipate like how far imperialism would extend capitalism's ability to expand market and increase inputs. Yeah, because he died in 1881. He could only observe, he could create models and then observe them and play out reality only in front of him. We have to add on, but we add starting with the Marx, starting from scratch and trying to figure out how to get from here to here. You have no roadmap. Who are you going to trust more than the guy that just told you to give away the foundational guy of the whole thing, the foundational set of ideas? And I'm saying that because Nathan Robinson exists so far away from the Big Bang of capitalism, that he is such a liberal subject, as we all are. He is so suffused with the liberalism that is redounded through the cultural superstructure over the last 200 years, that his insights will not go as deep as Marx's were, because he was there at the temporal beginning. He wasn't captured by the ideology of capitalism yet, because he hadn't grown up under it. Nathan Robinson is captured, as I am, as everyone reading this is, by the ideology of capitalism. So we all have to come together and take everything that came before us and everything that we see around us to build enough to counteract that ideology. And you start with something like Marx. You cannot start with nothing, because then you are in thin air. You are a late capitalist subject trying to bootstrap yourself into an observational point of view of capitalism that you cannot have because you're inside of it. It's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You are in capitalism. You're embedded in it. You cannot be outside of it to see where you are. But Marx could, because he didn't grow up under it. And that's why he is so disastrously wrong to say that we shouldn't have had Marx. Because that means that those things still would have come up. Those insights would still be there. People would still articulate them. But they would have articulated them later, which would have meant they would have articulated them with less specificity, and it would have been harder to build on them. It would be literally retarding progress, because it retards the dialectic. Because Marxism emerges to come into conflict with the reality of capitalism and create new realities. That's the dialectic of history. And it's like, I didn't get it for a long time, and that's where you get to the basic stuff, like historical materialism, and then on top of that, dialectical materialism. Like first the observation of the material conditions, and then the notion that they are driven by conflict between ideas, which is then turned at the higher level into class struggle. There's class struggle. They're all built on top of one another. Now, we're stuck here because intervening technology, this is where Marx dies, basically. Marx dies here. Now we've got this time here. We have intervening time. We have new technology. We have empire. We have the world wars. We have all this stuff, but we still have to get there, and Marx can't help us anymore. So now what do? We build on top of this with other stuff. Stuff about ecology, stuff about race, stuff about gender, stuff about technology, stuff about computers, all that stuff. You add it on top. You add it on top of the base here. Now, what Nathan flows to every other principle you're talking about. It flows. The dialectic flows all the way up from the historical materialism to the dialectical materialism to the class struggle. It all flows up to a state of actual existing socialism for all humankind. The actual end point of teleological Marxism. If you say no to that, what you're basing it on, like you're basically basing it on liberal concepts of morality. Now, if you're off here, if you're Nathan Robinson, you're going off. And you know where this is? You know what that arrow is up there? That arrow is liberal personal individualism. Because that's what like anarchism is, as Chomsky has admitted. Anarchist traditions and things of that nature exist to try to get to socialism without a basis of materialism. And what they do instead is they say, well, we are morally required to create a just society because we all are individual beings with individual rights. But that creates, the only way to adjudicate the idea of us all being monads like that is through market transactions, which necessitates capitalism. So it creates liberal subjects. And now liberal subjects, if they're given enough time and resources, might get to socialism, but given the constraints of resources on a planet over time, that will likely lead to destruction before it gets to socialism. This is where liberalism comes in. Because I think he's wrong, first of all, about voting for Biden. And I think his liberalism, so when I say that Chomsky is a liberal, guess what? Karl Marx was also a liberal to different extents. Now, to the extent that Chomsky is a liberal is the extent that he has explicitly said that his vision of the world, his vision of politics, his vision of practice, all comes from Enlightenment thinking. He has said that a million times. He fixes himself in the liberal tradition of personhood. So when he says, I want to do X, Y, and Z because of the liberal tradition, what he means is he believes in socialism as a moral proposition flowing from the inviolability of the individual. That's where the liberalism comes in. He believes that the individual is an unmoved place of meaning, an essence, that a soul exists. It's not necessarily spiritual, but there is an individual human consciousness that is unmoved and that moves upon others. That's the liberal conception of the self. It arose as the economy in Western Europe became more complicated, became more abstracted, and required a greater degree of abstracted thinking in order to process it. And that created a more abstract notion of the self than the more immediate notion of the Renaissance era, or certainly the medieval era, where everyone believes in God. So that version of the self that emerges to compensate for this new, more complicated, this new, more complex economic arrangement and social system that you're in, makes you into that liberal subject. So he carries that with him, and he said that. And so that means that he's approaching, so that's why he is a liberal when he approaches the question of should you vote for Biden. Now Marx also as a liberal subject because he was born in the early 1800s in southwestern Germany, a region that was one of the areas near the Ruhr Valley that was one of the original hotbeds of industrial capitalism. Now, industrial capitalism was still in its infancy, but he saw it, and his life took place in tandem with the arriving of industrial capitalism. Witnessing that in his life and witnessing its impression on the world around him made him think differently. And it made him take the dialectical processes that he noticed lead through economic development. Like, what powered us from slave states to feudalism to capitalism? It was a dialectical conflict of forces within the society. Slave, freeman, serf, master, serf, lord, worker, owner. That is how society comes into recognition of itself as a society, is through conflict within it. He applied that, as Hegel did, to the self. Now, they say that they do it on different sides, but it comes back to the same thing. The self is a series of resolved contradictions. It is not an individual monad that moves of its own volition. It is always being made by what's around it. And that means that when we examine a political question, we have to examine it in time and space. So that is why Chomsky looks at the question of vote for Biden two-dimensionally. Here's the Democratic Party, here's the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is less evil. It's less bad. Its platform is not as bad. The people who make it up are better people in the sense that they have more agreed upon stated values that accord with what we think is the good. So anyway, so that's the Democrats are on that axis better than Republicans, and so Chomsky says, I want what's best for everybody. The Democrats want more of what's best for people than the Republicans do, therefore I have to vote for Democrats. And the context that Chomsky misses, because he's not applying dialectical reasoning to the question, is the role that the Democratic Party plays in making the Republican Party worse over time. They drive each other. The degree to which the presently construed Democratic Party is allowed to maintain its structure, the people in charge of it, and its material base, as in who contributes money to maintaining it, that will continue to, as it has, drive the Republicans bad, to the right, even more reactionary. So their rule is even worse. So whatever that is, that dimension is absent from Chomsky's analysis of the situation, and so it's wrong. And the reason he gets it wrong is because he comes from a liberal conception of the self. He thinks that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are distinct things that move of their own volition, based on what the people within them want. That's not the case. They are brought into being in conflict with one another, always, at the personal and system and intellectual level. So that is why Chomsky is wrong. And it comes from him being a liberal. Like I said, Marx was also, here's the kicker. Marx also, growing up in the early 1800s, had a liberal conception of the self that he interposed on top of dialectical materialism. So he accepts personhood to the level that Chomsky does, of all humans are worthy of respect, that the golden rule applies to all recognizable humans, depending on how we define that. But then he puts dialectical materialism on top of it. Chomsky doesn't.